everyone, I'm Kayla and I'm really excited to do our last big project for Women's and Gender Studies 2021. This has been an amazing course and it has really opened my eyes up to many things and I have really enjoyed it. So I'm just gonna get started. So for my writing assignment, the two frameworks that I decided to work with were structural racism and misogyny. I'm gonna connect them to the 4 modules. I'm gonna do it kind of in a list format and I'm gonna just look up hearing so that I don't misquote anything. So first we're gonna talk about sports and pay gap, and we're gonna connect it to misogyny. So, for example, the whole atmosphere of sports is very male dominant. For example, fans, media presence, locations, and different levels of weight rooms, for example, really favor men. And so that's kind of where I'm gonna go with this when talking about misogyny. For example, even the pay gap is different. Like this past season for men's and women's basketball, Davis made $27.1 million, while the women's basketball star, I think I'm gonna pronounce her name wrong, but I think it's Ogwu Mike, earned $115,000. That pay gap is just astronomical, and that just goes to show you that the sports field just has always favored men. So that's kind of, I can connect to the misogyny framework. Also, pay gap is not only in a sport atmosphere, but everyday life. And you can find that women make 82 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And I'm sure that this is a quote you hear often, and we have talked about it in class. So that pay gap, even everyday work environments, are a little bit misogynistic. You might say that why wouldn't companies look to hire women since they pay them less? But they do. For example, the education system, not so much in higher up education, but education systems like elementary school favor women, and they make a way below average of something that some field that a man might dominate in. So that's just something to take a look at. So that's how I'm going to connect both of those to my misogyny framework. But next we're going to talk about structural racism in the country, but also just in an everyday life atmosphere and media. First I'm going to talk about technology because I think this is a really interesting thing, and I'm really going to focus on the Vox video and may even insert some clips. Throughout the Vox video, they talked about how technology favors the white race and how it's just the structural idea that any person of color or any other race is inferior. For example, the Zoom green screen is less likely to work on someone of a darker complexion, but also the Twitter thing that they talked about throughout the entire video about them cropping photos, they even said it like, they even used the quote where it says, always finding a way to put the white face first. It's really interesting to think about, but also we have to think about when you go to Google like prom pretty hairstyles or an unprofessional look, what kind of comes in the up in your Google search. I'm gonna just actually add a clip of me doing that with just some music in the background. Next, I'm going to talk about medicine. This is going to be my last topic to connect the framework for structural racism. And I have like a lot of facts up here that I'm going to read, specifically with COVID-19. I found that topic was really important to what we're talking about right now. And you just find that ethnic and racial minority groups were just completely disproportionately represented, specifically in February to May, that spike that we had. So as you can see I'm not 100% sure, I think it was the Ronson citation that I used for this, but you find that people of represented racial and ethnic groups live in multi-generational, multi-family households, which means that the living environment is not always the cleanest for a virus like this that spreads so easily. Also, because they live in these multi-generational households, people have to work many jobs and can't afford to be not working during this kind of pandemic, and can't force themselves to live off of unemployment if they have these multi-family households. So that they just found that, and I'm gonna have all the links for my citations below in the description, but I definitely found that medicine and technology were big factors in structural racism that just comes from systemic thoughts and biases. You can also connect it to implicit bias, because it's just this norm that we have found that we live in for that structural racism. So just to connect, we talked about misogyny, the act of not only disliking the idea of women in power, but also just favoring the idea of men being empowered, but also structural racism that comes from many, many years of just living like people of color are just inferior to white men and women. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my vlog.